Welcome to the program. The federal government has seized on a report from the Productivity Commission today to back its argument that a carbon price is the most efficient way of cutting emissions. And it's warning that if Australia doesn't act, it risks lagging behind the rest of the world in tackling climate change. The report compares Australia to several other nations, though it finds none of them yet has an economy-wide emissions trading scheme in place. National Affairs correspondent Heather Ewart reports.
The government wanted evidence it was on the right track in seeking to impose a carbon tax to reduce emissions, and today it claimed to have it, gleefully brandishing a report from the Productivity Commission comparing Australia to 8 other nations: the US, the United Kingdom, China, Japan, Germany, India, New Zealand and South Korea.
This report today shows absolutely conclusively that Australia is in about the middle of the pack, along with the United States and China. And because of that, we are actually in danger of being left behind. So this report gives lie to the accusation that somehow Australia is leading the world. We are not.
The Commission found more than 1,000 various carbon policy measures in the country studied. No country had an economy-wide emissions trading scheme in place, but there was a limited ETS covering European Union nations and plans afoot in countries like Japan and South Korea to introduce them. What the Treasurer seized on was this.
The means to reduce carbon pollution varies from country to country, but one thing is very clear from this report. So-called direct action policies like Mr Abbott's, are not only ineffective, they are also very, very expensive.
The issue here is not climate change. The issue is how you deal with it. Now, there are smart ways and there are dumb ways to deal with climate change. The smart way is to take direct action, as the Coalition proposes. The dumb way is to damage everyone's cost of living, damage the competitiveness of Australian industries through a great big new tax on everything.
OK, well, it looks like we're coming this way, eh?
In what's descended into a tit-for-tat debate on the best way to tackle climate change, the opposition leader had already chosen his backdrop to coincide with the release of the Productivity Commission report, visiting a coal mine in the New South Wales Illawarra region. Predictably enough, he was singling out this point.
There is no other comparable country which is imposing an economy-wide carbon tax on itself. There's no other comparable country which is imposing an emissions trading scheme on itself.
The other thing that comes out of the report very starkly is that the most efficient way of achieving carbon pollution reductions is through a market-based mechanism, such as a price on carbon.
The Commission certainly found that emissions trading schemes offered a relatively low-cost option for reducing pollution, and that's what the government was most pleased about, without going into all the fine detail. But for some, the report simply reinforced the obvious.
It's a fair reflection on how it places us compared to about 7 countries internationally, and what it demonstrates is what I think most people knew already, that you have an island which is Europe, which has very high taxes, which has a cap-and-trade system and various other renewable arrangements in there, and you have the rest of the world, which have virtually nothing.
Criticism too that the Commission wasn't asked to compare Australia with some of its chief trading competitors.
The countries that weren't examined by the PC have negligible taxes, and these are the countries that basically can compete against us for resource markets. We're talking about Canada and South Africa and Brazil and Indonesia. These have negligible imposts.
We compete with Indonesia, we compete with South Africa, we compete with Mozambique. They're the sort of countries. Colombia, they were not looked at. And I can assure you that those countries are not imposing any measures on fugitive emissions from their coal mining industries.
As with any report related to a sensitive political issue, the key players will always highlight what best suits their cause. For the Treasurer, today's report enabled him to reinforce the government's narrative, and it's not about to change.
Australia is in the top 20 emitters in the world. We have the highest emissions per capita of any developed economy. So Australia is a very big emitter of carbon pollution. And because we are also a very big exporter of coal and LNG, it is absolutely in our national interest to price carbon. We need to keep moving if we want to keep up. If we don't act, we risk being left behind.
I think they're making it up. And I don't think the report says we are lagging behind. It says different countries are doing different things.
What matters now is how this report is received by the Multi-Party Committee on Climate Change. After all, it was commissioned for them. And tonight, in a pre-recorded interview for the ABC's Lateline, key independent Tony Windsor was making positive sounds.
In terms of answering the broader questions, is the rest of the world doing something? I think it's pretty obvious to most people now that most people, or most countries, are trying to address this issue, and I've always argued that Australia should play a role in that, and obviously I think the report will add impetus to that role.
The government is yet to set a carbon price and will be guided by recommendations from the Multi-Party Committee. Until that happens, this debate drags on.
Heather Ewart reporting.